fuck going on with this?
GCI, yeah, that shit gon' fall. Rather die than my bitch to the tone.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's episode. It amazed me today after talking with a few people that they still have no idea what's going on in Iran, and I can't be mad at them because the reality is that the mainstream media is being completely silent to the situation. We hear more about what Kanye West is tweeting, to who Kim Kardashian is banging, to the Russian war. And this is an embarrassment to the people of Iran and all its citizens who live abroad, outside of Iran, globally. Let's just break down some things. We'll have a little bit of historical context so everyone can be brought up to speed. Iran's history is very long. It exceeds over 8,000 years, and it would probably take us about a whole year of lecturing to really discuss the ins and outs of Iranian politics, social movements, its culture, etc., etc. But let's get back to the main point of these protests. On September 16 of 2022, Mahsa Amini, who is a Kurdistani Irani, she's from the region of Kurdistan, was visiting Tehran with her family. Reports say that the morality police came to take her away. Her brother was trying to fight them to see what the issue was. They told her brother to come pick up Mahsa Gina Amini from the police station within 1 hour because she's going to have a re-education course. Somewhere in this time frame, she gets beaten to death and succumbs to her injuries about 3 days later. Shortly after that, Mahsa is buried in her hometown in Kurdistan. After that, protests began in Kurdistan. Soon they spread into Tehran. And within about a week to about 2 weeks, every region and every state in Iran has massive protests. Why is this so important? Because as we speak, this protest is being led by women and young women. It is the largest female-led movement on the planet. It is the largest female-led movement for women's rights in our modern-day history. We've probably never had a movement this large supported by this many women ever. Hate to say it, I haven't seen it in other countries. I just have not. This movement has been led by women, it's been fundamentally supported by women, and the rest of the population is sticking behind them. Mahsa Gina Amini's death sparked a volcanic eruption of anger for a country that is very young, over 40 years of economic failure, suppression, repression socially, and a theocracy that is like a dictatorship. People were fed up. Her death united the entire country and allowed them to see why they're so mad. It gave them an outlet for all of them to band together. Now, there are some news outlets out there globally who are trying to use this as propaganda for their own pushings. For example, in India, like the Hindustan Times, I believe, calls it a anti-hijab movement. Some people think there's a civil war. All these things are false. Let's just break down what this movement is not. This movement is not anti-hijab. You know why? Because there are hijabi women who are protesting for basic fundamental rights that we take for granted out here in the West and in America. This is not an anti-Islamic movement at all. This is a movement where people get to have their basic fundamental rights, where people get to choose. For women, for example, women get to choose if they want to wear hijab or if they don't want to wear hijab. If a husband and wife can hold hands walking down the street and not get questioned by Basij and Al-Quds forces and morality police. So that a boyfriend and girlfriend can comfortably go to a cafe and have some chai naba with each other without getting beat up because they're not married. Shit, to even just be able to own a pet. There's just some basic fundamental rights that we take for granted, but it means the world for these people in Iran. And maybe this is something we can learn from in America, to not have our basic fundamental rights taken away from us. But back to Iran. You know, the New York Times had a very shitty article that this is all about economic, failures. No, this was about a young girl, the future of Iran, being brutally beaten and killed over nothing, whose life was being treated worse than a stray dog and was killed worse than an animal over nothing. And people in Iran got mad. And the reason why they got mad is because enough is enough. In real Iranian culture, a woman is valued significantly. They praise her, they admire her, they cherish her. So to see the future of our country all of a sudden be killed over nothing, the anger just came out. And it reminded people of how bad the economy has been, how bad money has been mismanaged, how much theft has been taken out of the oil and natural gas funds that the country has, how a country that can literally produce all of its food is having food shortages, how in the deep south of the states of Khuzestan and Sistan and Balochistan, they've been completely neglected. They've had water shortages for years, and this shortages has spread to other provinces of Iran, and how they don't take care of them, they don't build any infrastructure, how the economies there are just failing and people are barely getting by. So all these things came out of her death, out of Gina's death. And it allowed people to band together to fight for what they want. Now, let's take a little bit of a step back. Why is Iran where it is today? We're not going to go back to the original white revolution that I believe happened around 1906 to 1911. It's about 100 years ago. We're going to focus a little bit later in time from that period, a little bit sooner to our time frame. In 1950, a pro-democracy leader by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh, with the backing of the noble Bakhtiyari clan, comes into power. Bakhtiyari was seen as the father of democracy in Iran. Iran around that time, was so poor that he flew to the United Nations to nationalize the oil fields of Iran out of British and Russian hands. And people loved him for this, because in the 20th century, Iran's wealth was being raped and pillaged by outsiders, unfortunately. In 1953, the United States, along with the British government, conducted an operation known as Operation Ajax, I believe. It could be the wrong name, but they did conduct this operation, where it was their first successful coup in removing an elected leader from a country. They brought back the Shah of Iran. And from this moment, the seeds of discontent and distrust emanated among the Iranian population towards the West and America. What a lot of people don't know is that around this time frame, the Ayatollahs ran a lot of schools for very poor and impoverished areas. And they then began to really enforce their teachings. I remember, around the early 1900s, they had their own revolution, the Ayatollahs, but it failed. So it's roughly about 40 to 50 years later, you kind of see a shining moment, and the population was also a little discontent. Regardless of, from 1950 to 1970, the amount of wealth that Iran was generating and became one of the richest countries in the world, actually richer than the United States at the time. By 1970s, some discontent was arising in the Shah because of certain things that were happening. And by 1978, the Shah of Iran leaves and puts power into the hands of Prime Minister Dr. Bakhtiyar. Carter comes into power in the United States, and instead of aligning himself with Dr. Bakhtiyar, he decides to make a deal with Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, why is this important? Well, it's going to take us to where we are today. So instead of the United States supporting Dr. Bakhtiyar, who wanted to live and see Mossadegh's dream come true of having a constitutional monarchy, because Mossadegh in the 50s never wanted to get rid of the Shah. He wanted to make a constitutional monarchy, which is a form of government similar to what you see in Japan and England, where basically the monarchy is present, but it's more of a democracy where the people get to vote for who they want to have in power. And a monarchy is there as a symbolic gesture. So this was going to be Bakhtiyar's goal. But Carter said, oh, this sounds stupid. Why should we come and align ourselves with a democratically thinking person, and instead let's go to an extreme religious zealot, and that's going to sound like a better deal. And the reason why he wanted to do that was because on the one side, Khomeini promised a lot of things that he did to his population, such as, free oil and all these other things. But when Khomeini came into power, he kind of said, fuck you, America. And this term became known as blowback, where the United States comes and supports one character, but then that person comes and goes against them. Then in 1980, at that time, Donald Rumsfeld sent to Iraq. They signed a massive weapons agreement, and the Iran-Iraq War begins because the goal is to try to capture Khuzestan out of Iranian hands so that America can get more cheaper oil, as Khomeini had promised to them. Now, how is it important to today? Well, it's important because the Democratic Party under Carter, instead of aligning themselves with Bakhtiar, literally put the Ayatollahs in power. This is a sin that we are all paying for today. It is a mistake that they made, and when you ask in America, whoa, who gives a shit about what's going on in Iran? Well, you should give a shit. You should give a shit. You should give a shit because this is a mistake that our leaders made, and their silence today is even a greater mistake, and it is a wrong that they must correct. Had they never interfered, it'd be a different story, but they interfered many times, and it is now their turn to correct that mistake. Because America put Iran here, and the silence of people like Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, these women who claim to be champions of women's rights and women's movements around the world and feminist movements are sitting fucking silent because they want this government in power. You have to just follow the money. If they truly had an issue with the Iranian government, they would never allow their children to live abroad in America and Canada, but they live here freely and get to have a wonderful time without a hijab, without getting beat up and killed, while their fellow citizens in Iran are constantly being attacked. For something so stupid as not wearing the hijab correctly, which I just want to make this clear is very anti-Islamic, because in Islam, there is no compulsory hijab. You can read the book, you can study it, there's no such thing as compulsory hijab. It's just being used as a tool of control to suppress women and to suppress men who support women in having equal rights. And their silence is equally as bad, because their silence, Kamala Harris's, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton's, and Joe Biden's, their silence is equal to the murdering of Iranians that is taking place right now. We are the foundation of democracy. We are the blueprint for democracy. We are the franchise model for democracy and women's rights and women's movements and equal rights. And when there are movements going on in the world, it is our duty to ensure, to help those movements prosper and succeed. Apologies there. One thing that is a little disturbing about Iranians who live in America is that they have a bit of a generational gap in terms of knowledge of what's going on in Iran. You might see and hear a lot of Iranians, especially on social media, say you should go and call your local representatives, place more sanctions on Iran. Well, this is the stupidest thing we can do. Because sanctions kill Iranians. It doesn't kill the government, it kills Iranians. I'm going to explain why. Due to US sanctions on Iran, the people of Iran have no access to medical care and medical aid and medical equipment for their medical facilities. By about last week, around the second week, between the second and third week, because we are now in week 4 of these protests, just about every province in Iran, hospital directors and staffs and medical facilities were saying that they're running out of medical equipment. Sanctions do not allow doctors and hospitals to procure the medical supplies needed to take care of their patients. So a lot of protesters are dying to injuries, whereas they would have lived had sanctions not existed. Had sanctions not existed, Iranians would have access to telecoms. There's no cell service right now, and there's no internet in Iran. Some of us have not heard from friends and family for weeks. I had one friend tell me that they had no access for the last 3 weeks, and all of a sudden they've had over 100 messages on their phone from other friends in other parts of Iran and family. When those people could communicate with them, and she's like, where she's lived, she's had zero access. She said it's so bad that even even as of recently, she still has no idea how much money is in her bank because A, she's afraid to go to the bank, and B, she can't check what her balance is on her app because it doesn't work anywhere. Interestingly enough, no iPhones work in Iran. People with Androids are able to circumvent some of the barriers to make the internet work, but iPhones are completely shut down, which makes you ask two questions. It's rather that the Iranian government is a genius and has figured out a way to basically go around Apple's like mega defense barriers, or Tim Cook gave them the backdoor code. Let's just think about that for a moment while I go on to the next stuff. So sanctions are extremely bad. Economic sanctions are, to continue with the internet and cell phone sanctions, if these sanctions ever existed, Iranians would have free access to internet. They'd be able to educate themselves better. Right now, in this very instance, they can get information out better. They can communicate with one another better. And by not having these things, it doesn't allow them to mobilize better. It doesn't allow them to be able to share information better, to figure out what's going on so they can help one another better. It's very similar to many, many years ago when Hong Kong got returned to China. For example, in China, you couldn't go to Google and these other websites, but you could use Google's mainframes and servers in Hong Kong because at the time they were allowed to do that. So people could use a Google VPN in Hong Kong. If telecom sanctions did not exist in Iran, it would allow for entrepreneurs to make their own systems. It would allow, for example, Google to go and make Google Fiber in Iran. It would allow something such as Elon Musk's Starlink, which is relatively new, to exist in Iran. And it would allow people to communicate, share information. It would allow an industry to prosper, and it would allow other individuals to make their own versions of telecoms and not be reliant on state-run facilities that could be turned off like a light switch immediately when shit gets bad. So you can see sanctions kill Iranians. Now let's talk about the other economic sanctions. The economic sanctions placed under Trump after he left the nuclear deal have been devastating for Iran. Prior to that, under the Obama administration, there are many Iranians who were hesitant about signing this deal because A, they're worried that the United States will not keep their word, and B, they're worried that by signing the deal, it would allow terrorist groups such as Daesh from Afghanistan and Iraq to come and attack Iran much more easier because they felt it would weaken Iranian sovereignty. However, after the Obama deal, for the nuclear deal, Iranians saw an influx of foreign investment coming into the country. People are very happy. Iran made like a $4 billion purchase of brand new Boeing planes, which never got delivered. And a lot of people were seeing job opportunities. Talking about how sanctions kill Iranians, planes. Iran has one of the worst airline safety records because they cannot procure airline components and parts to keep their domestic fleets alive. So all these planes that they ordered was going to make their international air travel much safer and their domestic air travel much safer. So you see, once again, sanctions kill Iranians. Like physically, they're killing them. When Trump left the Iran nuclear deal and put even more sanctions on Iran, it only killed more Iranian people. The government prospered. It gave the government more control. They found ways to make more money for themselves. And so many young Iranians and old Iranians who were benefiting from the free flow of capital that was coming in before the new sanctions under Trump saw all that money go away, jobless, back to square one, where they can't do anything. A lot of dreams were taken away. I saw some sad shit. And I've heard of some sad shit. And it's heartbreaking to see people who are so smart and so intelligent, and wherever Iranians have gone in this world, they've contributed enormously to the GDP. They're some of our best lawyers, some of our best doctors, some of our best engineers, some of our best scientists, and they've contributed wherever they've gone in profound ways. I mean, Beverly Hills would not be Beverly Hills without Iranians. Hence the name Persian Palaces got created because of Iranians, because they're the ones who showed how to make beautiful giant homes, or just beautiful homes. So this idea of sanctions is terribly wrong. And on another note, I've seen many Iranians kind of ridicule some Afghan people in America. because there are movements being led in Kabul by Afghan women because they got inspired by what was happening in Iran. What people here don't understand, once again, is that Iranians in Iran understand that if they can make positive change, it's going to fundamentally change the whole region. In Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, you name it, you play it, it's going to fundamentally change it. When I can speak with Iranians in Iran, they are very happy to see that their movement is encouraging people in Afghanistan to go and do the same thing. They actually support it. I know people who are helping a lot of Afghan people relocate since the Taliban has taken over, and they're very open to this. It's not like it was 10 years ago where there's a lot of, let's say ethnocentric ideas towards our former children of the empire, the Afghans. They once belonged to Iran. We were once one big nation. But now it's a little different. So there's a little bit of confusion for people who live here and what the people over there want. I think the thing that is so heartbreaking is that there are little girls who are going to these protests and they're getting shot in the head or beaten up and they're dying. 14, 16 years old. And I just don't understand how America and our leaders can sit silent. It's not like these people want an invading force. They want help. They want medical supplies. They want telecoms access. Shit, send them some bow and arrows. It might level the playing field. But we should be ashamed that women and young girls are going and dying to gain the basic freedoms and rights that they want. Because between the water shortages in the South, the economic failures, the corruption of money, the mismanagement of money, the social injustices, Iranians have come to a point where they see no hope if things don't change within this government, or if the government just does not change at all. These people are very resilient right now. Now, Mahsa Amini's death was not the first major death. There's been other ones before her. About 14 years ago, during the Ahmadinejad presidency, when he won the election, supposedly when he won, there's the image of Neda being shot, and we see the blood coming out of her, and she died. But times have changed since then. I think the people who were around back then were more what are now Gen Xers, and that movement got quashed very quickly. I've heard some people say that there were more people who were protesting back then, but I beg to differ, because back then the protests were in certain areas of Iran, whereas now the movements are everywhere in Iran. You name it: Tabriz, Mashhad, Tehran, Esfahan, Zahedan, Ahvaz, Abadan, Khorramshahr. I mean, everywhere. Everywhere people are standing up. And what makes this one so much more unique compared to other movements is that you have teenagers, high schoolers, Gen Z, Gen Y, Millennial, Gen X, Boomer, Old-timer. Old-timer is someone who's older than Boomer, okay? And they're all out there fighting. They're just tired of this. There's a slogan that they were chanting in one of the cities. They're saying, "Bitarsin, bitarsin, maha ba ham hastin." And they're screaming in this like a huge crowd. And basically they're saying, be afraid, we're all together. That takes some balls to say that. At a university, they're chanting, "Mi jangim, mi mirim, Iran ra pas migirim." The students are basically saying, we're going to go to war, we're going to fight, we're going to die, we're going to get Iran back in our hands. I mean, stuff almost made me want to cry, because this is the future of the country. And they're out there saying those things. That we're going to go to war, we're going to fight, we're going to die, so that we can get Iran back in our hands. Very different from the things you hear about Americans saying when they want to go into protests. This is real shit over there, and people have this mentality. And that's why it's so disappointing when our leaders are not doing anything to make the situation better. Because like we said earlier, if they truly had an issue with the government of Iran, why are they letting their families and their kids live prosperously here in the United States and Canada? Because at the end of the day, the people in power right now, they have a certain agreement with them. And the money never fails to display the truth. I think moving forward, if you see this, it is very important for you to put pressure on your congressional leaders to lift sanctions, to empower the people of Iran. And that if there is to be a deal to be made, maybe we should do what we did with the Chinese when we made deals with them, which is they have to show and prove certain human rights improvements. And in Iran's case, it might also be certain, certain things within the government have to change if they want this deal to happen. Because if that's what the people want, they should get it. On a side note, there have been some rumors escalating that the Iranian government is using forces from like Syria and Lebanon and Adal, Iraq, to have these people come and kill the Iranian protesters. Now, I don't know if this is valid. It's just rumors I've been hearing. But during the last revolution of 79 and 80, they did do that. They used a lot of Palestinian militia groups and Lebanese militia groups to come and kill a lot of protesters. Now, like I said, hasn't been verified. We're trying to verify it. But as of right now, I think for us as Americans, it is embarrassing that little girls and women are dying and young university students are dying because they really want to bring some positive change to their society. And we're not talking about it. We're not discussing it. We're not even talking about how to make things better over there to help them achieve that. And I guarantee you, if some of those sanctions get lifted, it'll put pressure for things to change. Repression is never the solution. It never is. It only makes things worse for the populace. And this population is young. You're talking about 70% of people are between the ages of like 18 and 40. It's like a college town. And they want to fulfill and live the dreams that their parents had and do better than them because it's been taken away from them for the last 40 years. Anyhow, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. Thank you.